AI won't take your customers, but a retailer who uses AI will. The way that people can integrate nowadays and have things so seamless, it's become the standard.
I have a hot take. I don't think agency is dead.
Okay.
I think agency has a lot of potential.
The OEM might be trying to push the retailer of how to sell their vehicles, but the retailer might be able to then turn around and go, well, actually, I've been selling vehicles in the UK for 40 years. I'm going to help you understand how you should sell your vehicles in the UK.
Even if that fixed price car is better value for money, you feel like you're not getting a deal all of a sudden.
Hello and welcome to the Talk Auto podcast, where every month we get on industry experts to talk about all the latest in automotive. Now, for those eagle-eyed viewers, you may have noticed that I'm not joined by my usual co-host, Ben, this month. We are sad to announce that he has left for pastures new, but we wish him all the best in his new venture. Although I am looking forward to introducing you to my new co-host from next month. Now, on to today's topic, which is another interesting one for the industry, which is going to be the changing dynamic in automotive retail. I'm delighted to be joined by Sarah Blewett, Head of Research at Carwow, and Jake Roden, Business Development Manager at Cox Automotive Europe. How are you both?
Very well. Thank you for having us.
No problem. Now, just before we get properly into this topic, it'd be great to hear a little bit about your experiences in automotive and why you're on the podcast today. Sarah, should we start with you?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So, as you said, I'm the Head of Research at Carwow. I've been in automotive for about 10 years now. And in my role, I'm responsible for not only understanding consumer sentiment, but also the wider market, what's happening with our retailer partners, with our OEM partners. And I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you so much for coming on. And Jake?
Perfect. Good to have you both. Jake Roden, Business Development Manager. So essentially, I've work on helping our OEMs, lenders, retailers kind of grow into the industry. Typically, my history in this industry has been in more of managing the relationship with these kind of different customers and trying to find out how they can better get access to their customers or better online presences. But I think now it really helps bring it together, which is why it's such a good topic with yourself and obviously Holly taking us through it of where this industry is going.
And that is exactly the topic. There's been huge seismic changes within automotive retail in the past, kind of just throughout COVID, post-COVID years. And it's kind of just become a little bit more connected than ever, hasn't it? It's become kind of how important those connections are between retailers, OEMs, finance companies, etc. So how have you seen this play out in your respective roles? Sarah?
Let's say 10 years ago, the model was really simple. OEMs built cars. Retailers sold them. I think over the past 10 years, we've seen a really big change in how those relationships work. So obviously the agency model, which I'm sure we'll talk about, has really changed the dynamic between the OEMs and the retailers. And I think if you look at what's happening in the overall market, customers are much more used to using marketplaces for everything. So you might use Just Eat or Deliveroo for food. You might use Booking.com. You might use Skyscanner. And people are using marketplaces because you can read reviews, you can see availability, you can get everything all in one place. And the growth of these marketplaces mean that marketplaces now have tons of data. And that data is incredibly valuable in the automotive industry, where OEMs and retailers are now able to see what's happening across the whole market. So you're able to see who is considering your brand, who is leaving your brand, what else are they considering and why. And so this huge growth in data that we've never had before in automotive has meant that marketplaces are now more of a strategic intelligence partner to both the OEMs and retailers.
Yeah, I think I can second that with a lot of the data share, and especially we'll move on to kind of the agency stuff, but that got OEMs a lot closer to kind of consumers, whereas they always kind of had in that model, had a traditional middleman to kind of take on a lot of that responsibility. Yeah. And I think, you're right there with the marketplaces of people almost go to it as like a one-stop shop. So they do their research there, they see, affordability between models, they compare brands, all of these different fuel types, and then they go ahead and do the full purchase journey online. So I think what I've seen, especially in the kind of code weavers side and our retail wing of Cox Automotive, is people are getting more connected and people expect more, whether that be consumers expect more, whether that be retailers expect more. Everyone's kind of got a new level of expectation of what they should get. Yeah. And I think that's really helped us to understand there's more connections, but I think it's more deeper connections that people want to be able to see all their finance online. They want to know if they can afford the car without having to go into a dealership and then be able to have to talk through their finances. They want to get that decision online, sitting on their sofa like this, you know. And I think that has really changed over the last, decade or so. Has just become, kind of skyrocketed in there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think obviously you both then touched on the consumer side, which obviously has experienced quite a significant change. But from a B2B kind of business, retailers, dealers to marketplaces, as you've mentioned there, Sarah, OEMs, finance partners, what can you kind of say to that? Obviously, Jake, I know that you kind of specialise in that B2B element as well.
Yeah, I think it's a similar way when I talk about expectations that consumers expect more, but businesses expect more. So, a retailer expects more from their CRM or their DMS provider than they expect more from their OEMs that they're franchising with. So I think a lot of that is efficiency. And that's one of the big things I think is that there's realising is profit margins are so slim in the industry. We've seen rising costs. Everything is going up. So one of the ways, instead of passing that on to the consumer of prices going up of vehicles, is efficiency and bringing down costs.
Yeah.
There's something like 1% profit margin or just over 1% profit margin on the top line for a lot of these businesses, kind of overall. So increasing efficiency and reducing time, speeding up processes, getting more people in the door and out the door. And then there's the whole other side of it, the kind of boring side of it, which is admin, invoicing, all of this stuff that tends to be, or did tend to be manual, paper-based, all coming in-house and all being all kind of automated. I think that's really helped businesses try and grow, retailers scale. And also then you look at marketplaces and the connection that the retailers then have with the marketplaces that, you guys and other marketplaces haven't just become, you listing pages. It's, you're more information about the vehicles. You're showing finance, you're pricing vehicles almost, giving guidelines of how much retailers should price things at. So a listing tool has now also turned into kind of a pricing tool as well. It's just kind of grown as well in that B2B space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you're someone who's maybe new to automotive, let's say you come into a senior marketing role at an OEM, and previously, let's say 5 or 10 years ago, you would have had very little visibility into how your marketing spend is doing. You're spending all this money on all these different channels. And then there's this huge gap until people are coming into the showroom, maybe buying the car. And I think automotive is now catching up to where we're able to really see where your money's going. And so you can optimize the marketing spend for driving more efficiency.
Yeah. And I think that's, talk about the point of expectations again. I think that's because they expect it from more things. And I always like to say that, your website is your 24/7 showroom. It's willing to spend millions on bricks and mortar showrooms and look really nice. But realistically, if your online presence isn't there, that's what people are seeing at 11 p.m. at night when they're sitting, actually looking and trying to consume information.
Yes.
Whereas when they're in a retailer, people might not always act like they traditionally would because they feel, whether they feel a sense of pressure, rightly or wrongly. But I think when people are in their more relaxed environment and they can look through things, this is where businesses need to be and retailers need to be really good on their website. Yeah. Not only how it looks, what are the features, how it's optimizing, but in your points in Carwow is the content that's been put out there, really strong content to try and inform the consumer or just kind of help them understand where they can go next.
People, when they're looking at a listing on your site, they want to know, is this a good car for me? And I think there's a huge opportunity there to give people more confidence that this is the right car for them. You see these huge walls of text with all this information about the car. And I think there's such an opportunity to make it so much easier for people to compare cars. Yeah. And that is the first experience someone has of your dealership is your website. And so if it's hard to find the information you're looking for, you're automatically going to think, I'm not going to buy from this person before they even step foot in the showroom.
Exactly. And I think that's where those connections come into of, and we'll touch on it in kind of partnerships later in the episode, but how some of these partnerships between businesses can help them improve that, whether it be video providers sending out personalized videos to customers, or kind of bringing that journey a bit more in-house and make it look and feel as the retailer's journey, but also trusting those partnerships to kind of handle some of that work for you.
Yeah. And I think if you look to other industries, if you're looking at hotel booking websites, for example, there's so much richness of information there that I think we haven't quite got to on the automotive websites.
And we've spoken there about data and efficiency. And I think it's becoming kind of more evident that success for retailers depends on how well they're connected to that wider system. What do you think is driving that change apart from a desire for more data and a desire for efficiency? Is there anything else from a business standpoint that is driving that change?
I think there's a multitude of factors. I think those are the two big ones in efficiency and kind of driving sales. But I think also just trying to be innovative and move with the times of automotive always had this perception. And since I got into automotive, kind of always had this perception of being a little bit archaic in terms of the way they did a couple of things. I think COVID really shifted that. The industry really stepped up. Everybody stepped up in that time. And suddenly everyone kind of became digital experts overnight. And everyone kind of went forward.
In every industry as well.
In every industry.
Yeah.
But automotive, it was a needed change to be able to drive a lot of that. And I think about innovation, and it won't be a podcast in 2026 without mentioning AI. So I think it's get the buzzword in early.
Get it in there.
But it's always interesting about innovation, and people say, and our CIO says that AI won't take your job, but someone who uses AI will. Or you can always flip it and go, AI won't take your customers, but a retailer who uses AI will.
Yeah.
And it's the way that people can integrate nowadays and have things so seamless. It's become the standard of how we should be operating, really.
Yeah, COVID was definitely a bit of a catalyst for kind of digital innovation, wasn't it? And you guys have touched on the agency model, which we'll kind of dive into a little bit. So that was something that kind of built momentum throughout COVID, hit its peak post-COVID, and we kind of expected it to be the next big thing, didn't we? It was supposed to be this kind of industry-changing model. What happened?
Ooh.
That's a big question.
Big question.
I have a view. Maybe we'll disagree.
Okay.
Oh,
I have a hot take. I don't think agency is dead.
okay.
I think agency has a lot of potential. I think the brands that are doing agency right now are seeing great success with it. And I think if the transition to agency had happened at a different time, without the ZEV mandate pressure, without the new entrant pressure, without the margin squeeze, I think it could have worked. And I think there still is potential for it to work, because I think people do not want to haggle for a price.
No.
And there are, I think maybe we talk about agency model versus not as a sort of binary, but I think there's a lot in between there. There's a lot of ways this could work. But I think fundamentally, if you want a product in 2026, you do not want to go haggle for it. And I think people do not expect to be maybe treated unfairly having to haggle because they don't know how to haggle. And so I think that's a big opportunity for the industry. How it actually will play out, I think we don't know.
No, I agree. I think the fixed pricing is obviously one of the main selling points or headline facts about the agency model. And I think from a customer point of view, you're right. The knowing you go in and the price is the price, you pay what it is, and you're not at a disadvantage to somebody else who might work in a role that's gained them negotiation skills over their lifetime.
Yeah.
And I think from a retailer point of view, and as an OEM point of view, is the retailer in this aspect is fixed pricing is certainty for them. They know they've got a certain amount of assets, so it's this price, they know what return they're going to get off those if they sell them. I think a big one for OEMs was residual values, and this ties into EVs with EV pricing, used EVs. By doing agency EVs, it really helps them to manage and protect that RV. So in the used market in 2, 3, 4 years' time, whatever it might be, they know what their used vehicles are going to be pricing at, and they can help try and strengthen some of those RVs which have fallen off in certain models. Certain manufacturers have felt the squeeze more than others. So I think that's really gone into it. And ultimately, OEMs getting closer to the consumer, owning the customer. They own the customer then.
Yeah.
And I think that's good from a customer point of view, because they can get closer to an OEM and they get more of a feeling and an affinity with the brand. But from the brand itself and from the OEM, I feel like they get to understand their consumer type more, their personas. And then retailers are still there to kind of, in the agency world, to do the handover process. And that's an interesting one of whether some people agree or don't agree. And I think the problem comes with, and this is the kind of tackle that agency versus non-agency, right, is multi-franchise sites.
Yeah.
So if you've got a site where there's 3 or 4 franchises, big site, and one of those 4 brands is agency and the other 3 aren't, well, you talk about haggle versus no haggle. If you look at a car over there, there's wiggle room on that one, but there's not on that one. And I think that's an interesting point and a lot more retailers are going multi-brand, and especially with some of the kind of new entrant OEMs, they are targeting retailers and they're growing their retail network. I think that's an interesting point of when you've got the mix between an agency and a non-agency brand on the same forecourt.
I know. I really think one of the reasons the agency model has struggled is because not all brands win at once. And so if I'm a consumer, I'm comparing an average of 5 brands. 4 of them, I have some wiggle room, and 1, it's a fixed price. Even if that fixed price car is better value for money, you feel like you're not getting a deal all of a sudden. And so it's tricky. I think ideally, in my dream world, everyone would switch on the same day, and all of a sudden the whole industry is set up this way. That's not going to happen, obviously, and there's a lot of reasons why it shouldn't. But I think one of the issues with agency model is exactly that.
Yeah, I was going to say, we've talked a bit there about why we like the agency model, but obviously we've seen some major OEMs roll back that, pause that. Do you think it's because of these economic pressures? Do you think it's because dealers are kind of going and providing stock from multiple different OEMs? What do you think is the reason why it's not succeeded in the way that we kind of expected it to?
This might be a hot take.
I love
Another hot take. I think the retailer network has had years and years of experience in figuring out how to sell to customers. And they do a heck of a lot more than just haggling with customers. And I think they add a lot of value to the industry. And so I think it's not just as simple as, okay, we're going to take this over now. I think they added a lot. And I think maybe it was underestimated how much value they were adding.
I couldn't agree more with that. I think it's talking about how some of these OEMs move to the agency model. And I think the model or the move to that maybe, was the right thing or was a move to go. But I think the sequencing of it was wrong. I think they thought, a view of we're selling the car to somebody, somebody's then selling the car, and there's a margin there.
Yeah.
And I think they didn't have the logistics in place, or at least understanding of the logistics of, because retailers, and they have a hard time out there in the industry, retailers. And it's, like you said, they do a heck of a lot more than people might think or see at the kind of surface level.
Yeah.
Looking at the assets, looking after them, presenting them well, explaining it to the customer, managing multiple brands, multiple lenders, having to, push in FCA pressures, and then you've got the margin pressures on top of it, and it's all of these things stack on top.
Marketplaces as well. They have a lot of sales channels to be on top of.
Yeah, and they've got to manage all of these different things, and I think that's where looking at some of these improvements, and there's things I think we take from the agency model, like I think fixed pricing and a lot of the data that was gathered from it, I think is a really good benefit because people were getting closer. More data means better marketing, better for everybody, that they can OEMs can reach their target customers sooner.
Yeah.
And customers they might not have realised that were in their audience. So I think there's a lot of positives, but some of the negatives do start to outweigh. And I think there's, like you said, it's not going to be a switch overnight that everyone moves this way or everyone moves back. I think there's always going to be a happy medium. And I think it's how do we live in a world where you've got agency brands, non-agency brands, and you've got retailers, marketplaces, all of these different things, all working together, more connected, in order to just provide a better experience for the customer and get them into the car that they want.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one, actually. I've quite enjoyed that because I think what you've said there, Jake, about there being some significant things that we can learn from that agency model and take it forward. I think as an industry, it's as we're changing, as we're developing, as we're shifting between models and trying to find our feet in this kind of post-COVID, ZEV mandate, all of that world, where can we take those learnings and where can we move forward with them?
Yeah.
And speaking of the shifts in the industry, we are also remiss to talk about AI, but also about the new market entrant brands.
Who none of them have done agency models.
Yes, very, very interesting. But I think from a kind of retailer point of view, these brands have come in and they've invested a lot in their retailer networks, how they are presenting to customers, how they're building out the connections between partners with businesses. What do you think retailers can learn from these strategies that the new market entrants have brought into the UK?
I think it's better reaffirm the point of how much retailers are needed in the industry. Yes. If you look at these new entrant brands, and they've quite clearly seen their route to market is get into franchises and be able to get the brand out there. Because you look at some of these new brands and it feels like there's some popping up every week now, sort of thing. And it's for consumer, it's commonality of how many do I see driving down the road when I'm going to work? How many when I'm driving about do I see showrooms with the big logos of the new brands? And I think a lot of that familiarity and getting the name out there is a lot for these new brands of, yes, they can push their own marketing on either adverts or marketplaces and work with marketplaces to try and get their brand out there. But then that in addition to a retail brick and mortar footprint. Yeah. So when I'm driving up the road and I suddenly see 4 new brands that I've never heard of. I go back and research it. I might land on your website. I might land on somewhere else to go, okay, I need to understand a bit more about these brands. I think retailers can lean into that and be able to provide them a better experience for the consumer, because if a consumer is going to go into a showroom to an established brand, the likelihood is they know something about one of those brands, with the kind of big brands in the UK. They know something, either their parents have had one or they've got a friend who has one, but the amount of times now we see someone's kind of turned up and had one of these new OEMs, you go, well, I don't quite know about that. You know, what are the features? And obviously they tend to be EV, so it's what's the range? How does that work? And I think that's where retailers can really play into being experts and being the people to drive that education piece into the consumers.
Yeah, I think also the new entrants have a very specific job to do that is different to the established brands. So I run a lot of focus groups, and people say, I've never heard of this brand. If something goes wrong with my car, are they going to be around in 5 years? And I think the physical showrooms, especially part of a multi-brand franchise, do a lot to help that, because you talk to a real person in real life who shows you around the car and you think this building will be here in 3 years. And that's very specific. And it's very smart of them to be doing that. I think the more established brands, that's less relevant for them. I'm pretty confident that if I buy a Volvo will be around in 5 years. So it's not quite as important to me to be doing that. And so I think while there's definitely things to learn from what the new entrants are doing, they're doing a very specific job that the established brands don't necessarily have to do.
Yeah, it's very different kind of strategies, isn't it? As you say, those established brands already have a presence. They already have consumer confidence, whereas these new entrants are going in, I'd say blind. I'm sure there's some data behind it, but they're going in a lot more blind and needing to convince a lot more people than the established brands. And I think from a retailer point of view, it's kind of proving, as you guys have just been saying, the need for physical and digital. And how important that is for the retailer, for the OEM, and for the customer.
I think it's finding that balance of, like I said, the trust, and I think your point's really key there, of people are going to have these vehicles. The majority of people in the new vehicles, kind of finance penetration is extremely high. So people are going to have these new vehicles on finance, 2, 3, 4 year leases or whatever it might be. Like I said, they're going to want to know, okay, I'm going to get a service plan. Well, where am I going to take that vehicle? So I think the retailer in this aspect is kind of the point of trust, and it is the well-established, okay, I know that retailer because I've lived here for 30 years and they've always been there. They might have changed franchises, but I know the people in the retailer or I know the group. And I think that's where they can play a really big role and try and bring along some of this education of, because it's not just new entrant brands, it's also traditional brands introducing new product lines to compete with the entrant brands. So I think once they can kind of find that balance to be able to educate them on the new brands, but also kind of the new products that some of the established OEMs are coming out with as well, I think that'll be really good.
Yeah, I think it's interesting for the retailers as well, actually, because when these new market entrants are coming in, almost new to the UK, they'll be giving these retailers some guidance on how to sell their vehicles, information packs, I'm sure, like training sessions, etc. Do you think that's kind of stepping up the game for the established OEMs in what they're providing to their retailers?
I think so. I think there's some drive, and a bit of healthy competition doesn't go amiss, does it? And I think healthy competition, not just between brands, but between retailer and OEM. So the OEM might be trying to push the retailer of how to sell their vehicles, but the retailer might be able to then turn around and go, well, actually, I've been selling vehicles in the UK for 40 years. I'm going to help you understand how you should sell your vehicles in the UK. And I think that's understanding the industry and the UK automotive industry of who are the experts and who can we lean on. And I think marketplaces have a good place to play in that, of an established name with, I said about a one-stop shop earlier, where you can research the vehicle, you can look at finance, compare vehicles between each other, whether that be established or new entrant, and then also go ahead and purchase them. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. And there's also, I think, speaking about the relationship between OEMs and retailers, who better to know what consumers are concerned about, are asking, what they love about a car, than the people on the ground selling those cars. And so I think there's so much opportunity for OEMs to be learning more from retailers, especially retailers who now might have a new entrant brand in their portfolio.
So there's some retail groups who've kind of gone all in on this model and have changed a lot of their traditional OEMs to kind of new entrant OEMs, and they've kind of gone full in and had that, and then There's some who are slowly dabbling in it, and maybe they've taken a brand here that kind of fits in with their stocking profile, or they've taken one or two. And I think that's going to shift and change. Yeah. And I think a lot of the part of it is making these the brick and mortar retailers as kind of experience centers to understand, touch, feel the brand, understand what it's like to live with, and these longer test drives, not 20 minutes, but 24 hours, 48 hours, trying to, how would this vehicle be like to live with? Yeah. And I think that's where, like I say, the healthy competition, that everyone can kind of push each other to better it for the end consumer experience.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, talking of that connectivity proposition within retailers, OEMs, etc., partnerships are a bit of a hot topic in automotive at the moment, aren't they? I think we attended FD Live not long ago, and it was kind of the topic that everyone was covering in keynotes, in panels, kind of the topic on everybody's lips at the moment. And as we've kind of discussed, retailers are increasingly dependent on those external platforms, those external partnerships. How are we seeing that partnerships trends kind of play out amongst the retailer world?
Partnerships have always been kind of a thing that people are going to grow with. Not everybody wants to do everything in-house. Yeah. Large investments, you're kind of responsible for if it goes wrong. Yeah. I always think. So using strategic partners, I think, is the one here. And that's kind of what I would, if it'd be my message is, there's a lot of partners out there who can do different bits of the journey, whether it be front-end, e-commerce, kind of digital journeys, whether it be back-end, invoice management, contract management, things like that. But I think it's work with partners who are strategic and trustworthy. Of instead of having 14 partners to do 14 different parts of your journey, work with 2 or 3 key suppliers and partners who can really push you to drive. And I think it's that innovation piece of work with partnerships who are going to help drive you, and then also, again, challenge you back. And I think that's the way that everybody in the industry moves forwards. So not just being able to, okay, I've partnered with X company because they do this task for me, and that will get sorted. Yeah. Work with a partner who's going to go, well, should you even be doing that? Is that the way you should be processing this, or going about selling the vehicle in this way? Kind of more of that consultative partnership approach, rather than just, I have a problem, I need somebody to fix it for me.
Yeah, and I think a partner with a full market view is able to say, this is what your competitors are doing, not necessarily naming them, but this is what the overall market is doing. This is where you're falling behind a little bit. This is where your KPIs, maybe your conversion rates, maybe your response times are not where they should be. And this is a really big opportunity for you, because the ones who are doing it better than you in some way are the ones winning more sales.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an interesting time at the moment, isn't it? And I think, speaking to your point, Jake, there about kind of how they're shaping the performance of the retail sector. So you're kind of saying that instead of going for 14, 15, 20 different parts, I mean, we all know how many stages of the sales journey retailers have to go through, and how many different partners they could potentially have for every single step. Do you think that consolidation and choosing partners that can provide kind of multiple services, whether that be, marketplaces, whether that be, front end, back end, etc. Do you see that as the future of the industry?
I see it the future of, and I touched on efficiency earlier as a point, and I think that's also a key point of cost efficiency, but also just time of, if things can be joined up and seamless and work with a partner who's going to be deeply integrated. I think, what we've seen in our retail business over, especially the past couple of years, is we work obviously really closely with retailers and some third parties as well. And those third parties, they have changed. There's been new entrants and people have left, but I think a lot of it has been a deeper connection with those third parties. And I go back to expectations of customers expect more, so retailers expect more from partners like us. So it's the consumers are pushing the retailers, who then push us, and then naturally that kind of cascades back down and then back up. So I think being able to have that strategy, and someone, and you touched on it really well, of who's going to go, is that what you want to do, and kind of push you back. And I think that's the way we're going to move with it.
I think it's really interesting that actually a theme that we've covered quite significantly here, even if it's just in the undertones, is actually digital is important for consumers, for retailers, for OEMs, but how important is that kind of relationship that you have with people? So whether it is a customer going into a retailer and having a chat, or whether it is a retailer talking to a partner and saying, should we be doing this? Is there anything else you can provide? Instead of just a click, bought the car, click, bought that software. you know, the industry, I feel like as a kind of almost as a society, we're going to, you know, digital's going to roll out. We don't need almost human connection anymore. We're just going to do everything online. But actually, I feel like you guys have actually covered quite significantly about how important it is to maintain those relationships, business to business, consumer to business, in the industry.
Yeah, we've been tracking for years what people are actually doing online in terms of their car purchase journey and what they want to be doing online. And while we've seen an increase in people using digital platforms for doing research, for doing comparison, for narrowing down, for shortlisting, people still want to speak to a real person when they buy a car.
Yeah.
Like across the board, very few people want to buy completely online. You want to go touch the car, but you don't just want to touch the car. You want to talk to a real person and say, what are other people asking? You know, I think it's really important, the role that the retailers are still playing. And we're not even seeing a downward trend in people not wanting to go see the car and talk to a person. I think they're going to continue to be important for a very long time.
Yeah.
I think it touches back to the way that I see online and digital is it's an extension of the physical rather than a replacement. It's meant to enhance the kind of physical experience. So some of those things that can't be done online, like go and touch the car, go and sit in it, does it, you know, will my dog be okay in the boot? Whatever it might be that you might not be able to get that exact information online. I think it's being able to kind of do the parts that you need to do physically, but then making sure as a business your consumers have the option to do the parts online that they want to.
Yeah.
Not everybody's going to be comfortable sitting in hopefully a busy retailer and saying their bank details, their gross salary, things like this that are more sensitive. So having features where consumers can go and, you know, fill that in the corner of the retailer, go and have a coffee and think about it and actually, you know, not have that pressure to be able to have to give over information, or be able to send those consumers home with all of the information they need.
Yeah.
They're informed, consulted, and then it's up to them whether they complete the journey or not.
Yeah.
And I think by doing the research on you know, platforms like yourselves where you can do a research of a multitude of brands and then go into a retailer with a bit more of an idea of what you're looking for, whether that be makes and models, whether that be body types, fuel types, whatever it might be, you kind of narrow down your search quite a lot. And I think one of the biggest aspects of that is finance, just because of how much the finance penetration is on not only new but used cars as well.
Yeah.
I think budget-driven search is such a huge thing of being able to, me as a consumer, I know I've got this much to put down, I want to lend it over this amount of time, I do this annual miles, but flipping that on its head, because sometimes consumers won't have an idea of how much they can put down. They might just go, I know I have £300 a month that I can attribute to a vehicle, how much would I need to put down in order to reach my monthly payment?
Yeah.
And some of those things is an extension, and these partnerships that allow retailers to offer the consumers that choice, I think is really strong.
Yeah.
But it's not only consumers needing that human connection, it's retailers and it's businesses as well. And I think that's what I found more interesting about our conversation is actually that, you know, retailers are going to these partners and they want a conversation, they want to be informed, they want to be data driven, and they want to have a chat about how that partner can help their business succeed. I think that's just a really interesting thing that you brought up is, yes, it's from a consumer perspective, but actually in the business world, it still matters. And we still need to work with partners, and retail still need to work with partners that are listening to them and can progress them as a business.
Yeah, I think that's true of everyone. We are human, you know, we're very social creatures. Even in a world of AI, I still want to talk to real people and I still want to ask real people's advice. Yeah. I don't want to rely on Claude to tell me things because it lies a lot, for one thing. But also, you know, you just want the human connection, don't you?
Absolutely. Well, I think just one kind of final couple of questions before we wrap up. So we've obviously discussed there's been quite a lot of change in the industry, you know, shifting between the agency model, partnerships, etc. What do you think is going to have the biggest kind of impact on retailer success moving forward? Do you think it is that partnerships? Do you think it's shifting models? What would your input be?
I think the shifting models of OEMs is kind of out of the retailer's hands because it's dependent on what the OEMs do. Obviously, the new entrant OEMs have kind of set their path. Not to say that every one of them is going to do that, and there might be a new entrant who comes in and does go agency and tries to move that way. But I think partnerships is where I'd go as one of the strongest kind of growth areas in the next couple of years. And I think it's partnering with a really good strategic partner that is going to be able to drive you and push you to kind of do the best. And you said about it, take into account, here's what other people are doing. Anonymize it, obviously, but take into account of well, your competitors are doing this or the market's doing this, and that informed data research to go, okay, well, you want to start selling vehicles this way, or you want to roll out this new feature, or change this way. Here's how we think, and be able to almost model it and go, okay, here's how we think it would play out based on what we've learned before, what other people have done, and try and give that informed consultative approach. So what I would say is look for a partner who pushes you, basically.
I think the single biggest factor in retailer success, in my view, is the exact same answer I would have given 10 years ago. So in this industry that's changing so much, I think the single biggest thing is someone comes to you and wants to buy a car. Answer your phone, give them helpful information. And I think I'm still constantly shocked. I speak to customers all the time. I'm still constantly shocked by how many people are not having good experiences. They're not getting called back. They don't feel like they're being treated with respect. They don't feel like people are answering their questions. And so I think if you are running a dealership, the single biggest thing you can do is make sure that you have a great understanding of how people are experiencing your dealerships. What are your average response times? What are your average wait times? What are your ratings from people? Because ultimately, that is how you sell cars. All this other stuff we're talking about gets you to the showroom, but what actually sells that car is someone having a great experience with a real other person. And I think the single biggest predictor of retailer success is, are you doing a good job of that? Are you tracking it? Are you training your people? And are they delivering great service?
And those are two fantastic answers, because that covers the business aspect and the consumer aspect, which ultimately is a large part of the car buying journey. And I think that's everything for this month's episode of Talk Auto. Thank you both so much for being on. It's been a really insightful conversation.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Talk Auto podcast. As ever, we have our email in our show notes if you would like to suggest a topic or be on the podcast. Like, follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, or you can also follow us on YouTube. I'm very excited to introduce my new co-host next month, and I will see you then.